Hi everyone, Sarah from Lights Camera Accolade here, bringing you a short preview of our June bonus episode. For Pride Month this year, Abby and I watched Germany's 1931 film, Madchen in Uniform. If you want to hear the full episode and keep up with future bonus releases, you can find us at patreon.com/lightscameraaccolade. Hope you enjoy.
So, the film starts with Manuela's arrival at an all-girls boarding school. Manuela, whose mother died when she was young and whose father now serves in the military, feels stifled by the traditionally strict environment of the school. While she develops burgeoning friendships with her schoolmates, including troublemaker Ilse, Manuela's time at the school is quickly defined by her developing a passionate love for her teacher, Fräulein von Bernberg. The first night at the school, von Bernberg gives all her charges a kiss goodnight on the forehead. Manuela, desperate for her affection, gets a kiss on the lips. When her affections cause her to perform poorly in class, Bernberg draws Manuela aside and gives her one of her petticoats. Overcome, Manuela confesses her love, but is rebuffed. Bernberg can't give her special treatment, she says. In subsequent days, the girls of the school put on the play Don Carlos for the strict headmistress's birthday. With Manuela in the role of the male lead, the play is a great success, and von Bernberg is visibly moved by her performance. To celebrate, the girls are served a boozy punch, and Manuela gets messy enough not just to loudly confess her love for her teacher, but also to brag about having been gifted the petticoat. The headmistress immediately puts Manuela into solitary confinement, but is forced to release her for the sake of appearances when a princess visits the school. Instead, the headmistress reprimands von Bernberg for her closeness with her students and forces Bernberg to draw a line in the sand with Manuela. They're never to speak to one another again, she tells her. Crushed by the apparent rejection of her love and identity, Manuela stumbles from Bernberg's office and climbs the interior staircase of the school with the intention to throw herself to her death. But before she can jump, the other girls of the school come together as a community, not just to save her, but to spurn the headmistress for nearly driving a girl to suicide. The movie ends with Manuela in the arms of her classmates, with all the girls watching as the headmistress descends the stairwell and goes down a dark hallway in stony silence. And that's Madchen in Uniform.
Mm-hmm. First of all, great summary, as always.
Thanks.
I will say, initially, when I read a very brief synopsis of this movie, basically just that it was set in a girls' boarding school where a student falls in love with a teacher, I was a little squinty-eyed suspicious, just wondering how much I'd be like questioning the ethics of what I'm seeing on the screen.
Yeah, am I going to have to suspend my disbelief for the fact that it's 1931 and I guess we thought this was okay?
Exactly. And I feel like, unfortunately, because there are a lot of movies out there like that, where I'm just like, what was the motivation for some of these things? Whose eyes was this made for? How much is this going to get into ethically dubious territory?
Right.
But honestly, almost not at all. Because I think there were a couple of parts with von Bernberg, like her behavior, where I was like, girl, what is you doing? Particularly when she kisses Manuela on the lips instead of on the forehead, where it was just like, okay, you're playing into this maybe a little bit too much. But honestly, like the movie treats the setting and the themes with so much emotional intelligence and understanding that, especially for so many of the girls, it's like you're kind of in this very rigid Prussian style authority away from home. They express a lot of homesickness and stuff. There's a lot of loneliness and trying to reach out for connection and camaraderie and finding the little joys and whatever else, right? And so you have a lot of girls who just develop crushes on especially this teacher who is more compassionate and more understanding, and it's very normal, versus I think with Manuela, and for plenty of the girls there as well, probably the ones who are like literally tattooing themselves with von Bernberg's initials and stuff, who are like, no, there's definitely more to it than just feeling seen by someone. There is more of that romantic connection and awakening and stuff of
you're
identity.
14 and you're manic.
Yes.
Like with hormones.
Exactly. Pretty much.
The real vibe.
So no, I thought it was all handled really, really well. I really enjoyed it, and a little bit relieved, like I said, that it wasn't like a what's the Kevin Spacey movie? American Beauty sort of like situation or anything.
No, I think they handle it very carefully. At no point do they say, hey, this is inappropriate because I'm a teacher, but the vibe is there. And they manage to get that without also being like, especially because von Berg has that whole thing where it's like, hey, you have to grow out of this. But that somehow manages to be very specifically about Manuela's love for another woman, not the, hey, you're just feeling this way because I'm a person of authority in your life. There's a little bit of that, but they manage to really thread the needle very carefully without ever actually coming out and saying, hey, this is terrible because I'm a teacher. Like, that's not the subject of the movie, but they still manage to imply that, which is very impressive. It's really carefully done.
Yeah, which I very much appreciate. Just so shocked for its time, because again, 1931, the amount of emotional realism, the really natural performances from everyone. When it's like the movies that we've watched up to this point mostly kind of still feel pretty theatrical, or there's like a lot of that going on. But this just felt very naturalistic, very surprisingly modern, I think, compared to other films from the same sound era. But there was definitely a lot that I liked about the movie, a lot that I liked about the performances.
Kind of building off that, the performance by the lead actress, Tirtha Thiel, who is playing Manuela, is so good. I think she was older at the time. I think she was 24, but she has kind of that baby face. And I think that she had played Manuela in at least one of the stage runs. But yeah, she's got a real baby face, but she's just excellent. Like really very natural, but has this terrific open face. Like you can see every thought in her head. It's wonderful. But to your point, I think that there is such an empathy from the people making this movie and the script and everything about it for young women in their like teens, so girls who have a million feelings. And it's really lovely to see that much care for a cast of female characters. Like all the girls are lovely. Like Ilse, who's kind of like the troublemaker. She's like the person who is writing letters out. Her shrine to an actor. And basically every back room where it's like all these girls getting ready, or the scene where they're all changing for bed and they're not supposed to be doing hooliganism, but they're doing hooliganism. And there's just so much respect for the community of girlhood in this movie in a really interesting way that is not like For Daughters or the American movies we've watched in terms of like Screaming Girls. Even though I really enjoy some of those Screaming Girls movies, this is a more realistic concept and told through the eyes of like the people who made this movie were at one point Screaming Girls. So they have a lot of affection for a screaming girl. And it's not even screaming. It's just like, it's just hooliganism. It's just like that girl hooliganism
is such a good word for it, because it's different than obviously the dead end boys driving fucking trucks through sets and stuff. It's more like, and not to say that had they not had access to a truck, they wouldn't have done that. Ilsa definitely would have. But 100%. It's just kind of, you know, just the high energy of girls yapping hooliganism, pranking each other at times, but also being emotionally vulnerable at times with each other, and creating this support structure that is here for fun, but also here to really support each other. Obviously, this is kind of shown in the scene where there is like the hooliganism going on in the dressing room as they're all getting ready for bed and stuff. And we get a lot of those cute scenes. But meanwhile, Manuela, who's pretty new to the school, is with one of the other students in the room already. And she's crying a bit on her shoulder because it's just all overwhelming for her, talking about her mother that she recently lost and stuff. So it kind of runs that whole spectrum of that age where you're still processing so many different things.
Yeah. And I think that there's a understanding here that where that comes from is because girls, and I think this is still true today, but we see it in the movie really illustrated, is that girls are expected to be a certain way, especially in public. In this particular movie, we see them kind of running through like kind of proto-military stuff where they are, you know, they're expected to walk in certain lines and they're expected to behave a certain way. And this is not the Boys Town self-determining society of boys. This is, you're going to walk in a line, you're going to all row up so that when the princess comes, she can look at your cute little faces.
And then you're going to curtsy in threes as she walks past. Not everyone curtsying in one go, but like curtsy when she walks by you.
And you can't tell your parents that you're having a bad time because that would reflect poorly on you. And so there's a level of you must behave this way where other people can see them. And what happens then is when other people can't see you is then you behave this other way that is more honest and more vulnerable. And that's where you make your connections, right? Is kind of like outside the eye of society. Like that's just kind of like the expectation of girls. And this is a really deft concept of like, that's how it is. It knows that. But then also understanding how the queer attraction and stuff like that kind of comes out of that, and how it is not a reflection, but kind of a further step to that. This is how I have to behave in one place, but this is what I feel. Right.
Yeah. Which on that note, like I loved when von Bernberg is telling Manuela, even though she recognizes that this isn't just the normal type of emotional connection sort of crush because you just want the teacher to like you sort of thing. It is a genuine sort of attraction where she's essentially telling her she's going to have to grow out of it because society is not going to allow her to do that. And she says something like, you have to cure yourself, right? And Manuela kind of not really distraught, but a little bit disassociative, but incredulous at the same time, where she's like, cured of what? And von Bernberg tells her, you're not allowed to love me like that. And she just says, why? And it's like that question's left hanging in the air because it's just like, well, because society says, and it's just left there where it's like, okay, well, this is natural to her. And so what are you trying to say about that lifestyle? And then you were talking about in terms of the girls having to act one way in public versus being able to be themselves privately. I feel like the movie literally uses the phrase of like letting their hair down because it's established early on that part of that militaristic, how you have to look at all times is to have your hair very tightly coiled and stuff in the back, where Manuela, when she first comes in, is like saying, ow, you know, as the woman brushes her hair and pins it back. And stuff. And
like one of the first dialogue exchanges in this movie about queer love is, but it hurts. You'll get used to it.
Yeah. And then later von Bernberg is the von Bernberg. I don't know why that's so hard for me to say. Von Bernberg uses that phrase, right? Of like girls have to let their hair down sometimes, right? Of like having to be themselves or having to be who they really are. So that theming is, I think, again, woven throughout in various scenes, which was just really lovely to see. And then on the side of because ultimately, obviously, this was a movie that Nazis targeted, but it wasn't just for portraying same-sex desire, like sympathetically. That was part of it. But a lot of it, too, is that it does criticize that military discipline, and it really celebrates compassion over that sort of like authoritarian control. So just on multiple levels, it was very anti what the Nazis stand for. And on that note, like some of my favorite scenes actually were the ones where the girls just as a group would just like stare in defiance at authority figures. And there were two moments. One, when they come into the room to corral them into behaving, essentially. And you kind of get these really nice sweeping views of different groups of girls, but they're all just staring at like, she's not the governess, but she's the one who often comes in at the behest of the headmistress to get them to like really go back to rule abiding and stuff. And then later, of course, at the final scene, when they all come together, of course, to save Manuela, which was so beautiful. I was so stressed during that. I was like, oh no, we're seeing another stage door sort of situation happening. But as the headmistress sees what almost happened because of the way that they run this school, and has to do kind of like the walk of shame to some degree down the stairs past all of these girls who almost lost a friend because of what the headmistress had just put her through. And they're all just staring at her, defiant, standing together. It was just, I loved it. Love to see it. Love to see girls supporting girls.
Yeah, I've seen some criticism of this movie that it essentially didn't go far enough with criticizing the authoritarianism of the setting.
Sure.
Notably, like the headmistress, that is all the comeuppance that she gets in the movie, right? To realize that she did something that could have potentially killed someone. Right. That's the extent of the repercussions.
Yeah, I guess there's no statement that like she's going to change or anything because they still live within this rigid structure.
But like, I get where people are coming from with this, right? I can see where that criticism comes from. But for me, within the context of the movie, I'm like, And maybe, again, this is me talking about it in 2026, right? But I think it's like there's only so much you can expect a movie to do ever, right? And I feel like that within the context of its little world, the comeuppance doesn't necessarily... I mean, it does matter, but it doesn't matter within the context of this narrative, right? The thing that is important is the communal kind of coming together. Right. And I think that there is still something powerful in a communal coming together to reject that concept, even if it doesn't change everything right that second, right? Yeah,
and that's kind of what I was going to say too, is to me, I get that criticism, but on one end, it even just feels more realistic where, like you're saying, the communal coming together is often the most important change that you can hope for, because those types of power systems and structures and various oppressive regimes and even the mindsets and thoughts of other people for what they think is correct and right, like those don't always get changed. There's not always going to be that sort of more drastic shift immediately because of one event that happened. But for those people who the event happened to, then you might have a changing of hearts and minds, right? Or coming together. So to me, I don't know. It doesn't feel dissatisfying, I guess, because to me, I'm like, yeah, the headmistress strikes me as someone who even after this is probably going to keep running the school more or less the same way, because that's what society expects of her.
Yeah, like the win here is not necessarily changing the mind of the headmistress. It's frankly von Bernberg in the middle of arguing with her, realizing like, what the hell am I doing here talking to this woman when I could be out there helping the kids?
Right.
That's the real change of heart, essentially, in this movie, right? It's von Bernberg realizing that trying to change that is maybe not the most valuable use of her time, right?
Yeah, and I think this is something that is true to life in a lot of ways as well, where von Bernberg throughout is trying to like work within the system to make the system better, which is definitely often effective, like a real thing to do, but also it is equally important to recognize at what point are you just enabling the system versus being able to change it or not. And if you are at the point where it's like, okay, I can't actually change it currently here in this system, but is there something that I can actively do to actually support the cause elsewhere, which is what she does, right? And she goes and runs to the girls. And so, and I also get the sense that she probably won't continue at that school necessarily, but she will probably work towards greater societal change outside of it, maybe start her own school, who knows, you know, something more along those lines. Yeah, it's a possibility. I could see a sequel. You know?
If only.
There are remakes.
A lot of people making this movie died.
Oh, that was the other thing too. I was so sad because obviously any movie set in Germany around this time frame, my unfortunate first thought is I wonder how many of these people died because of the Nazi rise to power, and two, did any of them become Nazis? You know, where it's just like, oh, it's such a dark, on the cusp of very unfortunate events. I want to say the director is also a Jewish woman, if I'm not mistaken. So there are also a lot of the people involved in the production. A lot of the big names were able to flee. So actors and directors and writers and stuff. But obviously many of the smaller names didn't necessarily have the capability of doing that. And I did read that too, that many of them died during that period in Germany, which is really depressing.
Yeah, even the writer, Christina Winslow, she made it out of Germany, but later had settled in France with her lover. And they both got blamed as being German spies and shot.
It's awful. I read that too, because I know she initially, I was reading, was, I can't remember the woman's name who she was in a long-term relationship with during the Nazi rise to power, but
Dorothy Thompson,
who is a journalist, right? And so Dorothy Thompson was one of the early journalists who kind of saw the signs of Hitler's rise to power and what that would mean for Germany. So they left, I think, pretty early on. And I don't know how their relationship ended or what, but I know that Krista.
I think it's they ended up in the States. Yeah, and Winslow couldn't really find work in the States, like writing, because they didn't want any of her scripts.
Yeah, because fucking Hays Code period too, as well, on top of everything. So yeah,
and she didn't like writing in English, so she left Thompson and went back to Europe. And I think she ended up with, I'm trying to remember
her name, but I think she was an artist.
Yeah. Oh, she was a Swiss author, Simone Gentet. So Gentet was translating some of her work into French. And I guess that they were also doing temp support for refugees fleeing the Nazis. But they got blamed as collaborators and shot.
Just super, super sad. But I know the other part about Krista Winslow, because again, this is kind of semi-autobiographical for her, because she had attended a very strict Prussian boarding school as a teenager. And so I wonder how much of what we're seeing in terms of reflecting what we know is coming, like that authoritarian bend of Germany, if it's just truly history repeating itself, or if it was intentionally, you're kind of starting to see these signs again, or a bit of both. Potentially.
Yeah, I mean, I can see it being a bit of both, especially because Winslow, she went to that strict boarding school. B, she was a sculpture artist as well, and her family did not support her being a sculptor because apparently it wasn't a very feminine profession at the time. So I think it's one of those lightning in the bottle things, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like all these things happening kind of at the same time, strike the idea, and then they just are speaking to something that is very contemporary for the period.
Yeah. And with hindsight, right, we can make those connections so much more easily.
Right.
But it's crazy thinking the creators might have seen those similarities and stuff. But I'm sure there were a lot of viewers out there who might not have. And so just how jarring it would be. It'd be like us making a movie in 2021, just being like, thank God the Trump years are over. Let's never do that again. And then, fast forward to a second election of Trump. And you're just like, fuck.
Anyway, now we're bombing everyone.
Yeah, exactly. So history, time is just crazy.
Right. I do think that we have to talk about how terrific this movie looks.
Oh, yes.
Looks great.
Yeah.
I love the frock or pinafore or whatever it is that they're wearing is striped. My first comment when we started watching this was like, damn, hate to be in a girls' boarding school and be made to wear Beetlejuice's fit. So it has these like long vertical stripes, and A, it looks terrific, but B, there's so many architectural and like shadow things within the school that are really reflected in those dresses. And you could probably make the cheap parallel of like, oh, prison bars, but it's not really like, I don't think the school is ever really necessarily characterized to that extent, even though there is kind of a like social isolation factor, but it's never like, I don't think anyone ever calls it a prison, but it's kind of just that there's really so much of that echoed, not just in the architecture of the school and how it's lit, but also in how they're dressed and styled. It's really lovely, thoughtful production design and all those things coming together in a really lovely way. I also just think some of their shots that they choose, it's really brief, which is a shame, but there's a really cool, really high angled shot at one point on Manuela. And there's all those shots of the stairwell, the big, huge stairwell are really cool. So
yes, totally agree on that. I think it was filmed in an actual boys' boarding school, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, sure.
Versus like a set or something. But yeah, all of the scenes with the staircases filmed really, really well. One, I think there's just a lot of interesting visual dynamic going on there, but having those different contrasted scenes in that same setting was interesting because obviously we have the hooligans of just the girls trying to get to the very top and then see how long it takes to drop something from the top.
I think they're spitting.
Oh, are they? Oh, they're spitting initially, but then they're like, spitting. How far is it? And they're like, oh, if you drop this snap, whatever, and then you count essentially a firecracker, like a snapdragon firecracker or whatever. And then you count the seconds until it hits the floor. And so they do that. And then obviously there's a teacher walking by when that happens. And it's just like a silly scene. And then you contrast that to Manuela's ascent, very reminiscent of stage door, reminiscent of this, where she's praying the Our Father while intending to get to the top and jump right to her death. But then that contrasted with as the girls are frantically looking for her. And then you get this really excellent shot looking down the stairwell at all of the girls looking up at Manuela and realizing she's there, and they start screaming. It's like chaos, right? It felt so real, but it also it's just great use of that element of the school, right? Of the set.
Yeah, really excellent sense of place.
Ugh, loved. And so kind of on that note, because this was 1931, M was also 1931. And I just feel like the Germans at this time, their movies often just looked a lot better than what we
had
were
their shit together.
Making at the time. Because I think technically, even though they're the same year, if we were looking at when would this have qualified for Academy Awards, this would have been the 5th, whereas M was the 4th, which the 4th was like Trader Horn and Skippy and stuff, so it was like, oh man. But this one was Bad Girl, The Champ, 1 Hour with You. Shanghai Express, I think, did a lot visually, was a really beautiful looking movie, but it's still just like compared to a lot of those, both in theming, both in what they were doing with some of the camera work too, to really emphasize parts of the set or a lot of the movement of the school. And I just watched a short video on how directors utilize extras to really bring spaces to life. And it's something so subtle, but so impactful ultimately throughout the course of a movie. So here, I think they just had really excellent use of all of the various schoolgirls who are really lending a sense of realism and life and motion, where it's just like girls doing their own thing. You see various groups of girls doing hooliganism in the backgrounds or chatting and yapping. It feels very much alive. So just, I think, more so than a lot of the other movies that were coming out at the time, as I mentioned earlier, just felt very natural while also looking really good.
I would be very curious. So like a bunch of the movies that we're watching for the main podcast are really within this very rigid studio system.
Yeah.
And not just rigid, but intensely capitalistic studio system, I'd say. I think that's fair.
Yeah,
right?
That's fair.
And that ultimately, so like what that does is whoever's the head of the studio and the producers directly under them is really steering a lot of the creative direction of so many of the movies that are coming out. So you have this very strict structure system within the Hollywood studio down to who you're casting and that kind of thing, right? So I don't know enough about it, and now I'm going to have to go look it up, but I'd be very curious what the distribution and funding and all that, like what is that system like within Germany during the Weimar Republic period?
I know a little bit, but not a lot.
Yeah.
So I know that this was an independent film. Most films in Germany at the time came from a specific production studio, but I don't know how much producer influence existed in that studio, like how varied were the movies. I do just know that this one was independently made, and then, like I said, was very noteworthy for having just a ton of women involved in that.
Right.
And I know, surprisingly to me, this movie was very successful globally as well, and was a critical success.
Like critics survived, right?
Yes, yeah, exactly. So critics loved it, which it's also strange, especially I guess I was reading in Weimar Republic, critics notoriously would all disagree on everything all the time. But this was one where it pretty much universally had good reviews, and in the US, it was very popular. In Japan, it was very popular just globally. So yeah, to your point, even though certain prints had been destroyed and stuff by the Nazis, there existed so many global distribution versions of it that it wasn't as difficult as a lot of movies to piece back together and still have basically the full film. And kind of because of that, because it was actually a landmark movie, especially in like LGBTQ plus or queer cinema, that was very successful. It was something that people were able to point back to decades later. Like I think in the 60s or 70s is when this movie started coming up again. There had been, I think, remakes in between that downplayed.
Like 58?
Yeah, in 1958. But I think in that one, probably because of more of the everything else going societally there, because I don't remember what country remade it. If it was the US, I blame the Hays Code. If not, I still blame the Hays Code anyway. But that they downplayed a lot of the like lesbian elements in it.
Right.
And it was more about just the rigid structure and girlhood camaraderie. Like I think von Bernberg was more of a mom figure to her sort of thing.
Sure.
But in the 60s and 70s, when you're actually getting more interest again in LGBTQ cinema and some backlash to that, film scholars were able to point back to this movie as like, no, obviously these themes have been present and acclaimed in mainstream films way before, you know, the Hays Code, way before censorship and stuff. This isn't like a new thing that is being pushed or anything. This is something that is very much a part of the fabric of storytelling in film.